Okay, so let's have a little review of what we have discussed yesterday. We continued our discussion with the aminoglycosides, and then also we had our discussion about tetracyclines and the macrolides. So do not forget our mnemonics. By at 30, sell 50. At there refers to aminoglycosides and tetracyclines. Both groups of drugs inhibit protein synthesis of the bacteria, specifically at the 30S ribosomal subunit. Thus, when they inhibit the protein synthesis of bacteria, the bacteria can no longer multiply. They can no longer grow. So most of the protein synthesis inhibitors ng mga antibiotics are considered bacteriostatic except for the aminoglycosides. And then cell 50 refers to, C is for the chloramphenicol. We will discuss chloramphenicol later. And then E is the representative for all macrolides. So our macrolides, we have the most common, the CARE. C is clarithromycin. A is azithromycin, R roxithromycin, and E is erythromycin. So these drugs are also protein synthesis inhibitors, but this time they are inhibitors of the 50S ribosomal subunit. And the last one, L, we have the lincomycin. So this is our topic for this afternoon. And then depende sa atuang time, if I have more time left, I'll continue with the polypeptide antibiotics. And lastly, we have our unclassified antibiotics and newer antibiotics. Okay, so let's start with our lincomycins. So take note of the following information that you need to know about our lincomycins. First, they are our sulfur-containing antibiotics. Remember, the sulfonamides and the sulfones are also antibacterials that contain sulfur, but remember that they are synthetic. This time, our antibiotics derived from a microorganism that contains sulfur are the lincomycin. And since they are antibiotics, therefore they are obtained and isolated from a microorganism, specifically the Streptomyces lymphomensis. That is why they are called lincomycin. Linco from the lymphomensis, and mycin kasi mycin with a Y kasi it is derived from a Streptomyces species. Now, they are the most active and medically useful of the compounds that we obtain from fermentation. So before we can isolate the lincomycin, the substance, the raw material that is derived from the Streptomyces species is nag-undergo siya ng fermentation. And after fermentation, nag-uo si lincomycin. Okay? And they are the most active actually and medically useful na product of fermentation of the Streptomyces lymphomensis. Now, how about the spectrum of activity? The spectrum of activity is similar to that of the macrolides. So, whatever bacteria na pwedeng i-inhibit yung growth ng macrolides, ganun din yung ating lincomycins. So they are effective mostly against, pwede sila gram-positive, pwede din gram-negative. Basta similar to macrolides. Now, the mechanism of action is same gihapon kay macrolides. Remember, cell 50, E for erythromycin, that's the representative of all macrolides, and L for lincomycin. So they are still protein synthesis inhibitors, but they are specific for the larger ribosomal subunit. We call that PCS, ribosomal subunit. May I emphasize that one, the ribosomes of the bacteria class is called 70S. 70S, how we don't add the 50 and the 30. Altogether, both ribosomal subunits are called 70S, and it is divided into two. The smaller one is the 30S ribosomal subunit, and then the larger one is the 50. Okay. So take note of this since it is, they are protein synthesis inhibitors, therefore they are considered bacteriostatic. However, what is unique for lincomycin is they can be considered as bactericidal depending on the concentration, mostly on the concentration of the given antibiotic. It is dependent to various factors, but again, most likely nakadepende siya sa concentration ng binigay natin na drug. So, pag mataas ang concentration, lincomycin can be bactericidal, just like our aminoglycosides. Now, let's start with the first drug under the lincomycin. Siyempre, si lincomycin, this is the drug that is isolated from Streptomyces lincolnensis. Brand name in the market, we have the Lincocin. Now, where do we use the lincomycin? This is effective class for infections caused by gram-positive bacteria. Actually, you can use lincomycin for the treatment of bacterial infection in the bones. Example, we have staphylococcal osteomyelitis. Kapag ka ang condition plus the infection or any condition is sa bone, actually mahirap yan siya gamutin. The reason is, limited yung blood supply sa bones. So, di ba, yung ating blood kailangan ma-absorb in the systemic circulation and the blood will just distribute the drug to the tissues until makaabot siya sa target site. However, since slow and limited ang blood flow sa bones, mahirap gamutin ang mga conditions and infections sa bones. But for staphylococcal osteomyelitis, we can use lincomycin. Pwede siyang umabot sa bones and beat ang infection. However, the lincomycin can be distributed to the bones, but it cannot enter and hindi siya ma-adto sa cerebrospinal fluid. So we cannot use lincomycin for the treatment of infection involved in the cerebrospinal fluid, like sa spine and sa brain na mga infections. Sa bones lang siya pwede. Now, how about the adverse effects of our lincomycin? This can cause severe diarrhea and pseudomembranous colitis. Later, we will discuss what pseudomembranous colitis is. Included na din ang severe diarrhea. Questions about lincomycins? Wala? Let's move on sa clindamycin. Actually, ang mga drugs under the lincomycin, ang pinaka-sikat is si clindamycin. I believe you are familiar with clindamycin. Do you have any experience about clindamycin? Hinang audio ko. Wait lang. Sige, while waiting for your answers about your, have you heard, or kung personally you have not yet used clindamycin, pero in the community, have you heard how do the community use the clindamycin? Mahina. May 100% na ako siya. Yeah, that is true, Belly. Sa community, especially if maka-duty na kayo sa community, there are a lot of people na asking for clindamycin. Sa ilahang ginahimo, ginatambal nila for pimples. But they don't really take that orally. The clindamycin, wala nila gina-take orally. Ilahang ginahimo plus ginatunaw nila sa clindamycin with espinol. And then, gina-apply nila sa pimples topically. But, let me ask you, is that a good practice that the clindamycin that is supposedly taken orally is given topically with espinol? Yeah, the Dalacin C, that is class the well-known brand of clindamycin in the market, the Dalacin C. Though in my slide, kasi that is the innovator drug that they're using. Pero ang sikat yun, Dalacin C. So, ang pangutan na karon, is that a good practice that we use clindamycin for pimples na topical ha? What do you think? Will that be a will that be a reason for mutation? What do you think? Anong ilahang ginahimo sa community? Alit na sila ang isa lang kabuok nga dalasin. tapos palit na yun sila og eskinol. So mahitabuan na. Actually, that is effective for some case. Mauga na ilahang pimples and then maayo. Pero since the clindamycin is intended to be taken orally, in that case, pwede siyang maging reason for mutation and resistance. So, dili na ko matingala class na sa sunod, we will have clindamycin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. Remember the causative agent of pimples, the Staphylococcus aureus? Dili na ko matingala kung naay clindamycin resistant staph aureus. Actually, we have clindamycin in the market that is intended to be administered topically, pero ang ilahang ginahimo jud kay ang kanang orally taken nga dalacin C, ilahang that is in capsule form, ilang ginatunaw sa eskinol. Pwede man good nga dili totally, pwede maayo imong pimples, pero the bacteria sa imuhang skin is not totally eradicated. So, dili sila tanan mamatay and pwede sila mag-mutate. So, do not ever do that. If you have pimples, don't do that. Huh? Or if you know someone nga na ay pimples, please educate them. That is not recommended. That is not recommended to do. Kaya pwede mag-mutate ang bacteria. Yes, pero yung topical na clindamycin, okay lang. Kasi the dosage form is really intended for topical use. Not the one na ilahang ginahimo. So, pwede ninyo to i-recommend katong topical na lang. Actually, dili talaga nahan natong topical class. Kay mahal man to. Mahal to siya. Compared if mupalit sila og dalacin C, tapos mupalit lang sila og eskinol. So, mao lang na ang disadvantage of the topically given na clindamycin. Mas mahal siya. Kasi syempre, they will just buy one capsule of dalacin. Of pharmacies, please do not give them, do not dispense one only. Mabalaan yun na nimo nga para sa pimples kay isa ra ilahang paliton. Tapos mo reason out pa dun sila kasi pangitaan na to sila reseta, di ba? So mag-reason out sila nga para lang man sa pimples. And dako gyud na siya nga no sa practice, ha? Nag-isdan tawag pimples lang na it is supposedly not, that is supposedly not a serious infection, but if mali ang practice na itong ginahimo sa treatment, then mahimo na siya ang serious infection. Okay? So, clindamycin is just a semi-synthetic drug. Its structure is and it is an analog of lincomycin. Now, its activity, pwede siya, effective siya against staphylococci, mga staphylococcus species na streptococci and pneumococci. And it is also a very potent drug against bacteroides. Bacteroides class is a non-spore-forming bacteria. It's a gram-negative bacteria. Actually, we have bacteroides in our body. The Bacteroides fragilis, it's a normal flora sa ato ang gastrointestinal tract. But remember, our normal flora can be opportunistic. Pwede sila mag-cause sakit sa ato ay mudaghan na kayo sila, ma-outnumber na nila ang ato ang immune system, pwede na siya mag-cause og sakit. So our clindamycin is effective for that type of bacteria. However, just like lincomycin, the clindamycin can also cause severe diarrhea, and as well as the clindamycin or lincomycin-associated pseudomembranous colitis. This is actually a board exam question. Paborito ni nila sa board exam, kaning adverse effects sa ato ang clindamycin or sa ato ang mga lincomycin. We call it pseudomembranous colitis, and when you do colonoscopy, this is how your colon looks like. Magkaroon siya ng infection. Kanang puti-puti na inyong makita is the pus. Pus na siya, ha? Infection na siya caused by Clostridium difficile. However, na si Ma'am Van, I think si Ma'am Van, wala, Sige. So again, let's talk about the adverse effects of our lincomycins or the clindamycin. We have the pseudomembranous colitis. There will be inflammation of the membrane of the colon, as you can see on the picture. There will be pus kasi infection ito class. Caused by Clostridium difficile. So this is actually a normal flora. This is considered our normal flora or normal microbiota living in our gastrointestinal tract. However, during the course of treatment with clindamycin, if ever there will be overdose, other microbiota or normal flora will be killed except for the Clostridium difficile, and that's the time it will become an opportunistic pathogen. And once na siya na lang yung maiwan, that's the time na mag-cause na siya ng pseudomembranous colitis. Now this one is life-threatening. It can cause severe diarrhea. However, the good thing here is we can reverse the pseudomembranous colitis just by discontinuing the treatment. So, pag severe na talaga, even if nagkaroon na ng pag-stop sa treatment, pero meron pa ring signs and symptoms of the disease, then our treatment for pseudomembranous colitis is the vancomycin. The last time I have introduced to you vancomycin, it's also our drug of choice for the methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, or that's what we call the MRSA. So vancomycin is a reserved drug. If ever nagkaroon ng resistance, reserved drug si vancomycin. It's not really given as first line except for the pseudomembranous colitis. Now we have different salts of clindamycin in the market. We have the clindamycin palmitate, which is suitable for pediatrics use para siya sa mga bata because it will render clindamycin as tasteless. Just like tetracyclines, clindamycin is also a bitter drug. And then we have the clindamycin phosphate, which is another salt of the clindamycin intended to be given parenterally, either intravenously or intramuscularly. But this one is reserved for serious infections, and ginagamit lang natin ito if ever oral administration is not possible. For example, in the case of those na kanaganing dili sila pwede mag-take pagkaon na solid and dili nila magamit ang ilahang oral route. So kani ang ato ang ginagamit na clindamycin phosphate. Okay? So that's all for our lincomycins. Topical na unsa na clindamycin. Yes, we have a topical clindamycin. It's in the form of an ointment, and kung gusto ninyo nga i-treat, gamiton ninyo siya for pimples, then I recommend na kato na lang inyong gamiton, the ointment form. It's just that it's more expensive, pero please do not use the one that is used by the community nowadays, yung clindamycin na tinutunaw sa esgenol. Kay pwede nga maayo ang inyong pimples class, but pwede na wala tanan nga bacteria namatay, and that will be the reason for mutation. Cause siya og resistance. Okay? Gaano katagal yan gamitin ang topical? Actually, naana sa iyahang label, depende sa imuhang case. Let us see kung unsa siya kadugay. Let me see the dosage regimen. Where is the dosing? Okay. So, the topical clindamycin should be applied on the whole area of the skin, not just with the pimples, dili lang siya kang pandinhilay mo pimples, din hala pa din mo siya i-apply. No. Ang recommended dosing for this is you have to apply it once a day sa whole area. That is to first treat the pimples, and then second, avoid breakouts from the other areas sa imong skin. Now, you have to make sure na naayo tanan nimong pimples before you stop using it. Kasi pag wala nimo siya gihuman nga wala pa naayo tanan, resistance ang sunod ato. Okay, I hope I have answered your question. What do you mean nahalo na sa ibang ingredients? And what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that, Belly? Yung ginahalo sa eskinol? Wala ko kayo kasabot. Pwede gamiton ng bugay. Actually, I'm not that sure. Ay, sa mga cream. Ay, pwede man siya gamiton. Pwede siya gamiton until expiry. Pero there are antibacterials in topical form na basahon ninyo ang label kasi na ay uban nga after opening they are just good for 28 days. So beyond 28 days dili na nimo sila pwede gamiton. You have to discard them because dili na sila stable or dili na maka-ensure sa ilahang safety and stability. Okay? So that's muna siya ang advantage of checking the label kasi it's different from one antibacterial to another. Okay? So I cannot answer the question on the eskinol ha kasi since it's not recommended, you cannot see any literatures about that. Anything else that you want to ask? Ano yung mga problema sa inyong mga pimples, class? Actually, kita, no, layo na dayang ato ang age gap. Pila na inyong edad? Feelings na bata pa. Pingunot akong kita. Oy, pag-sure niya, Claire. Mayingon ako magkita, mga bata, para kalimod ko, 29 na rin ko. 29 na din ko, so 9 years na ang mga gap, more or less. Kalagot. I was 9 years old when you were born. Sa inyong age, class, kada gina-correct na ako. Sa inyong age, it is typical na na-jud na pimples, na-jud na breakout. But, kanang pimples, it will not make you lesser person. So, maayo lang na siya. Pasagdi lang na ninyo kay maayo lang na siya. Hindi kayo ta mag-inarte sa ato ang face kay masamot na siya. Huwag ka, daot. Kasi plus points. Plus points. Ang baby face. Mukha. Bahala ang pimples problema no kung kanus siya habit. Ang uban lang manggod kay kanang mapuno na ilahang face and makaano na siya sa ilahang self-esteem. So mo na siya ang nanginahanglan og medical health jud. Pero kung na kay pimples sa isa ka buok parehas aning sa ako na kay pimples diri kiber malaya lang na siya giyaha. Yeah, actually I have lots of pimples nowadays, especially sa mask area. Glagot ko. And I'm not that really arte when it comes to skincare. Okay ra ko manghilamos sa buntag and then sa gabi if dili ko kapoy. Pero pag di ko makapanghilam sa gabi, automatic na siya pagkaugma, nagig ko'y pimples. Pero dili ko siya nga to kadaghan. Pasalidan lang nako siya. And at the same time, as girls, that is also common nga before our menstruation, magkaroon po jud ta og breakout. That is hormonal effect of hormone. So it's normal before the menstruation na kay pimples. Aka nang mapilog sudlay. Grabe ko manudlay. Uy, asa di dapat imong pimples na napilman. Napilman pag panudlay. Kung sa mga agtang diri nga part ka na normal up na siya mapil. Ilan na ninyo ang inyong pimples. There are other causes of pimples plus nga kanang mapuno ang ilahang face. And bisag unsaon og treatment ni gamit na og clindamycin, bisag unsa na lang na antibacterial ang gigamit, wala pa gihapon na ayo. It is maybe due to hormonal imbalance. So, para maayo ang inyong pimples, i-correct ang hormones. Kasi bisan pag muadto mo sa derma, sa unsa na ng inyong inudnod sa inyong nawong, wala pa gihapon na ayo siya. Kasi, wala na correct ang hormones. So, hormones una before mawala ang pimple. So, again, ang palatandaan na ana is kung nahimo na nimo tanan, nagamit na nimo ang bisag unsa na lang na antibacterial, wala pa gihapon nawala. Adto ka sa imong ubigayin ni and pa-check sa imong hormones. Kasi basig mauto ang imong problema nga kay daghang pimples. I hope nagkasinabot na. Questions pa? Wala. So our next lesson will be about polypeptide antibiotics. We will be identifying them and their mechanism of action. And then at the same time, we'll be discussing the important unclassified antibiotics together with their uses and also their mechanism of action. And lastly, we will be discussing the newer antibiotics we have in the market. But we'll start with the polypeptides. From the name itself, polypeptides, it's actually, their structure is actually just like the proteins. Pero they can be used as antibacterial. Pero antibiotic, gihapon sila, meaning they are also derived from microorganisms. And actually, our polypeptides are one of the most powerful antibiotics that we have. However, we cannot really generalize their mechanism of action because each drug has different mechanism kung paano nila either patayon or i-inhibit ang growth sa microorganism. Giisa lang sila because of their structure kasi polypeptide sila, but not because of their mechanism of action. However, class, they are powerful. They have different mechanism of actions, but when it comes to their clinical use, we reserve them as drugs for serious infections and for those na nakadevelop na ng resistance because nalimit kasi ang gamit nila kasi they have several undesirable adverse effects, especially nephrotoxicity. So medyo toxic sila when it comes to our kidney, so we don't really use them as first-line drugs. So our first polypeptide is the vancomycin. Number 1, ginagamit natin siya for MRSA. Number 2, this is our treatment for pseudomembranous colitis. Number 3, that you have to take note, since this is an antibiotic, so it is isolated from a microorganism, specifically the Streptomyces orientalis. Number 4 that you have to know about vancomycin, it's not effective against gram-negative bacteria except for Neisseria. So that is why, diba, you can use this one for Staphylococcus aureus that is resistant to methicillin. Remember, Staph aureus is a gram-positive bacteria. And then we have treatment siya sa pseudomembranous colitis caused by Clostridium difficile. Remember, Clostridium is also, tanan klaseng Clostridium is also gram-positive. So do not forget that we can only use vancomycin for gram-positive bacteria, and we only have 1 gram-negative bacteria that is susceptible to vancomycin, and that is the Neisseria, like the Neisseria gonorrhoeae that causes the gonorrhea. Now, this is a polypeptide. Its structure is almost the same with those of the proteins. And how do they know the structure of vancomycin? Its structure was elucidated by a combination of the nuclear magnetic resonance, or the NMR, and the X-ray crystallography. Okay, that's how they know the structure of the vancomycin. Gamit sila og very sophisticated na mga machines like the NMR and the X-ray crystallography. Now, how about the mechanism of action of our vancomycin? Actually, vancomycin is also a cell wall synthesis inhibitor, but it's more on the mucopeptide polymer. It binds with a D-alanine terminal, and na siya sa uridine diphosphate and acetylmuramyl peptides na required for mucopeptide polymerization. Remember, the cell wall class is a combination of a lot of things. The cell wall can have lipids. It also have sugar, mga mucopeptide means it's a combination of sugar plus the protein. So that part of the cell wall mo na siya ang target ni vancomycin. Specifically, again, that D-alanine terminus of the peptide found in the mucopeptide polymerization. But overall, para gihapon sa inhibition of the cell wall synthesis. Okay? Questions about vancomycin? So again, para siya sa gram-positive bacteria. And when do we use this? If the bacteria fails to respond to our first-line drug kasi naging resistant na siya, that's the time gamito nato si vancomycin. Pwede po siya ihatag for endocarditis, that's inflammation of the outer portion of the heart caused by gram-positive bacteria. Okay? Now, how about the toxicity? This is also a board exam question. For vancomycin, the toxicity is called red man syndrome. Again, kung natay gray baby syndrome, napod tayo red man syndrome caused by vancomycin. So, literally, red kasi Redman syndrome is actually an anaphylactic reaction against vancomycin. It's a severe case of allergy na magkaroon of redness, itching, pruritus of the most likely the torso, the upper part sa body sa tao. Okay? And since this is an anaphylactic shock, this is life-threatening kasi pwede siyang mauwi into bronchoconstriction, so mahirapan ginhawa atong patient, and it may also lead to shock, so magbaba ang blood pressure sa ato ang patient. So again, do not forget the term Redman syndrome, that is an adverse effect specific for vancomycin. Questions? Wala? Okay. Let's clear the writing screen. So the second polypeptide is we have the teicoplanin. Teicoplanin is a mixture of 5 related na mga glycopeptide antibiotics. So mixture na siya, 5 kabuok sila na mga antibiotics that are also considered peptides. So kanang 5 na nga antibiotics are also derived from actinomycet, specifically the actinoplanin stechomyceticus. Gitawag siya teicoplanin. Now, sa 5 na antibiotics nga gisagol-sagol to produce the teicoplanin, the mannose is common to all. So, naa sila'y sugar. Mannose, di ba, is a sugar. So, naa sila'y sugar sa ilahang structure. That's the B-mannose. Now, since this is also a polypeptide, so most likely its action is similar to that of vancomycin. However, na siya mga advantages over vancomycin. Number 1, teicoplanin has longer half-life kasi it has actually greater solubility sa lipids. So, since na siya greater solubility sa lipids, mas makapenetrate siya sa mga tissues na to and sa mga phagocytes. And pwede siya mag-stay dito for a longer period of time. Now, for antibiotics, if you have longer half-life, it means pwede siyang once-a-day dosing and pwede siya makatake sa iyang action for a longer period of time also. And number two advantage of teicoplanin over vancomycin is that it is less toxic. Remember, vancomycin can cause Redman syndrome. However, teicoplanin, hindi siya toxic compared to vancomycin. Now, the mechanism of action is still similar with that of the vancomycin. Teicoplanin also is an inhibitor of the bacterial cell wall synthesis, specifically in the D-alanine terminus of the peptidoglycan. The same thing, inhibition of the cell wall synthesis. questions about teicoplanin? Wala. Nagkasinabot na sa atong teicoplanin class. Number 3, we have the bacitracin, which is isolated from Bacillus subtilis. Now, this one is also a board exam question because of the story of its isolation. So, bacitracin actually means basi for Bacillus subtilis. That is the microorganism kung asa natin bacitracin. And racin is actually from the name Margaret Tracy. She was a 7-year-old girl na nagkaroon siya ng fracture. Tapos dito sa iyang debrided tissues from the fracture, dito nakuha si Bacillus subtilis and dito na isolate si bacitracin. So, ano siya ang board exam question ginha nila na nakita kasi sa pagkaroon ng fracture ni Margaret Tracy. So that was actually an open wound na fracture. And then nakita nila na walay bacterial infection nga nahitabo even though it is an open wound. And then nagkuha sila og tissues from the wound ni Margaret Tracy, and then gitanaw nila what is happening anong walay infection na nahitabo. So nakita nila dito nga na ay bacteria present, that's a bacteria present, Bacillus subtilis, and further investigation leads to the discovery of the compound bacitracin. Okay? Questions? So that's the first thing that you need to know about bacitracin. Second is you cannot combine bacitracin to heavy metals because heavy metals can inactivate the bacitracin. It will precipitate bacitracin, and once precipitated, it will be inactivated except for zinc. So zinc is still a metal, but it's the only metal that is required for the activity of bacitracin. That is why for me to remember bacitracin, I always say bacitrazine para dili ko makalimot sa zinc na required for the activity of the drug. Again, I call it bacitrazine. Okay? Kasi all other metals should not be incorporated to bacitracin. Now, how about the mechanism of action? The same with that of the vancomycin and teicoplanin. Bacitracin is still a bacterial cell wall synthesis inhibitor, specifically on the mucopeptide part of the cell wall. Remember the term mucopeptide. Muco means sugar and peptide is for protein. That part of the cell wall ang gina-inhibit ni bacitracin. The same thing with the other two polypeptides we have already discussed. You can ask question anytime, ha? So, bacitracin class is not well absorbed in the gastrointestinal tract, thus you cannot see bacitracin that is formulated for oral administration. You can see bacitracin in the market in topical form, but pwede po siya parenteral for systemic infections. But you cannot give it orally kasi it cannot be absorbed in the gastrointestinal tract. Okay? Next, we have the polymyxin sulfate. The brand name in the market is the Aerosporin. Since this is also an antibiotic, so it is isolated from a bacteria called Bacillus polymyxa. That's the name polymyxin B sulfate. So this is just active against gram-positive organisms or gram-positive bacteria. This is also not effective against gram-negative bacteria, just like the vancomycin. And just like the other na mga polypeptides like the bacitracin, dili po din siya ginahatag orally, but this is administered topically. So kani sila class bacitracin, the polymyxin bisulfate, mao ni ang mostly mga antibacterial nato or naka-ointment or naka-cream. So for example, sa akong manghod last time, nagkaroon siya og infection kay ginakalot niya iyahang like papakan siyang amigas, kaluto niya pag maayo hangtod magkaroon ng secondary infection. So ang hatag lang is topical na antibiotic, specifically the bacitracin. Wala na siya gipatake o orally taken na drug kasi the infection is just sa skin. Okay? Pag ano na ninyo, ma-encounter ninyo pag mag-work na mo sa community. So, dili lang tanan para sa oral or parenteral nga drug, napagdagdag ang antibacterial nga ginahatag topically. So, mechanism of action, it's on the cell membrane function of the bacteria. Take note that the cell membrane and the cell wall are two different things. When you say cell wall, it's the outer covering of the bacterial cell. That's the target of katong tatlo nga nauna natong discuss na mga polypeptides. However, for polymyxin, it's more on the cell membrane. After the cell wall, the bacteria has cell membrane. So that's another covering sa bacteria. So, daghan silang covering. Sa tao, we don't have cell wall. We only have the cell membrane. And then remember, our cell membrane is a lipid bilayer. That is true also for the bacteria. It's most likely a combination of lipids para mabuo si cell membrane. Okay? Next, we have the colistin sulfate. We have the polymyxin S in the market. Another antibiotic, this time isolated from the Aerobacillus colistinus. Now, where can we use the colistin sulfate? This is used for the treatment of refractory UTI caused by gram-negative microorganisms. So that's what I mean when I say we cannot generalize the mechanism of action as well as the use of our polypeptides. Kasi most of the polypeptides I discussed are given topically. This time you can use this orally for refractory UTI. When you say refractory UTI, mo ni siyang UTI nga pabalik-balik. So di ba na ay mga patients nga ing ana bisag karon nag-take og antibiotic na ayo siya niya. After some time UTI siya pabalik-balik. Colistin sulfate is effective if the refractory UTI is caused by gram-negative organism. Example, Escherichia coli. E. coli is a gram-negative bacteria. Most commonly, it is the cause of the unhygienic na UTI. Okay, and then we have the cholistimethate sodium, which is given intramuscularly. And take note of this. It's actually derived from colistin, but its advantage over it is derived from polymyxin, pero ang advantage niya over polymyxin is it's free from toxicity. But it is used in the same conditions mentioned for colistin, which is for refractory UTI. Okay? Tapusin ko na lang, what time is it na? It's 4:23. I still have time. So we have the gramicidin. This is obtained from a bacteria called a gram-positive bacteria called Bacillus brevis. Now, just like the previous antibiotic, ang iyaha pong target is the bacterial cell membrane. It's actually an ionophore that will cause the loss of potassium from the cell. So, si gramicidin actually will target the cell membrane, tapos pagkahuman, it will cause the leaking of the cell membrane, wherein pag mag-leak na siya, ang potassium ang mugawas. So pag mugawas ang potassium class, pwede na siya mag-cause of death of the bacterial cell. But gramicidin class is useful only for gram-negative bacterial infections. Okay, so that's it for our polypeptides. Any questions? Wala. Kaya pa sa atong mga brain cells ni? Wala, may pangutana. So, daghan kaayo ang inyuhang isulod sa inyuhang brain cells na mga antibiotic, gikan pa sa penicillin hangtod sa polypeptide. Kasi ang next nga lesson, unclassified na. So, wala sila classification. We cannot group them based on their structure. Dili po dato sila mag-group based on their mechanism of action. So, muna nga, giisa na lang sila ka-grupo and we call them unclassified antibiotics. So ang mga actually daghan kaayo mga information about the drugs, pero gi-summarize na lang nako atong mga important things that you need to know para mabawas-bawasan ang kanang kailangan ninyo i-store sa inyong brain. So what is written in my slide are the most important information that we need to know for each antibiotic. Okay? So sa unclassified antibiotics, the first thing here is the chloramphenicol. Brand name in the market is chloromycetin. This is isolated from Streptomyces venezuelae. And kauban siya dito sa cell 50, meaning chloramphenicol is a protein synthesis inhibitor specifically at the 50S ribosomal subunit. Now, what do you need to know about chloramphenicol? It's actually the former. Take note, please add kasi hindi ko siya nilagay sa slide ko. It is the former drug of choice for typhoid fever. What's the causative agent of typhoid fever? Salmonella typhi. So, drug of choice ni siya dati. Pero nowadays, please take note that our drug of choice for typhoid fever is the third generation cephalosporin. Most likely ang ginagamit ay ceftriaxone. Ceftriaxone nakaroon na po ang drug of choice. But we know plus that one adverse effect of chloramphenicol is the baby syndrome. Kasi, literally, the baby magkaroon siya circulatory collapse. Magkaroon siya with the circulation, the baby will have cyanosis and baby siya. And if hindi siya maagapan, it will lead to cardiovascular collapse and death. That is why chloramphenicol is a no-no for the infants. Kasi, meron mag-gray baby syndrome sila. Kasi, the babies are not capable of metabolizing chloramphenicol. So, katong discussion sa metabolism, chloramphenicol is metabolized through the phase 2, specifically the glucuronidation. And for babies, the glucuronidation pathway is not yet fully developed. Thus, they cannot really metabolize chloramphenicol due to toxicity. Again, we call it gray baby syndrome. Aside from that, chloramphenicol can cause aplastic anemia. When you say aplastic anemia, you will have low blood cell count. So, kanang klaseng cells of blood. We have the white blood cells, the red blood cells, and even the platelets. So it's time, it's 4:28. I'll be continuing my discussion for the unclassified antibiotics next week. But before continuing my discussion, I'll be having a quiz. Mag-quiz ta, gikan kay aminoglycosides, hangtod kay polypeptides. So, hangtod kay polypeptides kay ang nasugdan lang man sa unclassified antibiotics kay si chloramphenicol. Tapos wala pa na ako na-discuss ang different salts of chloramphenicol. Okay? Questions?